my name is Lauren, and my teammates and I are students in the SOCI 231 Social Problems course here at Rice. For this course, we worked all semester long to identify a prevalent social problem in society today and devise a way to combat it. My teammates and I decided to organize this panel on understanding refugee issues to raise awareness in the Rice community to a pressing matter occurring outside the hedges. Houston is one of the cities in the United States that welcomes the largest number of refugees every year. In the wake of the travel ban by Trump and the decreasing amount of refugees welcomed into the United States in the past 2 years, we wanted to bring in panelists from prominent refugee services present in Houston to speak on their experiences with refugee resettlement and their thoughts on this complicated process. We are pleased to introduce Jan Digelov, a Rice alum and the chief strategist with the Firestarter Group, Adam Babakar, a refugee from Darfur and the chair of the Darfurian Association, and Elena Corbett, the community engagement coordinator at Interfaith Ministries, which was founded by prominent refugee activist Ali Al-Sudani. We also had Ghislaine Williams, who was originally scheduled to be one of the panelists, but she unfortunately was ill today and was not able to come. And this is also Rachel Lee, who's going to be your moderator for today. So, thank you.
So could we just start off with having each panelist introduce themselves and the organizations that they're affiliated with?
Yeah, hey guys, my name is Jan Digelov. I work with Firestarter and was once a student here.
Hello, it's an honor to be here today. Thank you for the invitation, Lorraine, and your colleague or your colleague. My name is Adam Babakar. I'm originally from Sudan, Darfur. Veteran, U.S. Army. I'm here representing Darfurian Association of Greater Houston, a community-based organization. And also, I'm here represent a Veterans for American Ideals. It's another nonprofit organization that focus on refugees issue, SIV, and anti-Muslim bigot. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elena Corbett, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at Interfaith Ministries in the Department of Refugee Services.
Great, thank you so much. Could each of you tell us how you got involved with your respective organizations and also with refugee issues?
Yeah, I was actually still a senior here at Rice when I was working with some friends who for a long time I didn't know were actually refugees. Actually, my kickboxing coach was a Somali refugee here, and I had known him for about 3 years before I found out that he came the exact same year as me. I also came as a refugee in 1992. He came the same year as me. He came to the same apartment complex as me, and funded through a lot of the same agencies as me, but had a very different kind of life experience. And so I was really curious to find out why, and I was working with him and some friends from the Congolese and Sudanese community, and there was a community center in Southwest Houston, and they were really struggling financially. And so together we tried to figure out what were the programs that they were running, where was their funding coming from, you know, how were they able to support themselves and to sustain a growing number of new arrivals that were coming. And so at that point I really realized that a lot of the community infrastructure that brought me to where I was at that time and am today, which really underpinned the construction of the refugee resettlement process in the 80s and 90s, coming from a lot of Soviet Jewish communities, you know, who came all across the country here. They had a lot of communal support here. We had a lot of free loan programs for education. We had schooling. We had job assistance. We had a really long-term plan for refugee resettlement, which simply wasn't being applied anymore to newly arriving communities, from what I could tell. And so, yeah, I was still at Rice at the time, and I would go and I would hang out with my friends there, and we would try to apply for grants or try to figure out what was going on, or try to meet with new families that were struggling, and it really took a long time to put together any kind of cohesive vision for what can be done and what we're doing now. So.
Thank you.
I mean, I mean, the first question, I don't know if to answer for that question, but I'm a refugee. I mean, not by choice, but the reason I'm here is because of the genocide in Darfur, and the second reason I'm here today with you guys to tell you guys about this story that a lot of about 3 million refugees since 1975 been through. So I got involved with our community here in Houston because, as you know, when you'll arrive to a country that you don't know nothing about, it's very difficult. And in the war, you learn the technique of being a clique. You create your own clique, and so kind of survival clique. And I think socially we brought that with us here, having our own community, trying to figure out how we're going to do stuff together. So that's why we came up with the idea, Foreign Association of Greater Houston, and it took us about 2 years to register the organization. Yeah, IRS, I don't know the IRS, they keep sending us the paper back, you need to revise this, you need to revise that. We did not know, so, but anyway, it involved a lot with my community because the issues that we have, jobs, English, and most importantly, culture, orientation. You know, simple thing like a ticket. So that's what we do in terms of our community here. But the other thing, I'm an American U.S. Army veteran. I came to U.S. back in 2006, and I enlisted in the U.S. Army. I had 2 tours in Iraq and 1 tour in Syria. And coming back from Iraq and Syria back in 2016, very recent, and in the wake of current administration rhetoric about the immigrant and refugees in Islam, one of the Marines pilot, his name is Scott Cooper, he came up with the idea, and he said this is not right. I work overseas with a lot of Muslims and veterans and immigrants and refugees, and you can't have this. And he came up with the organization called Veterans for American Ideals to uphold the American values. And currently, we have 3 campaigns. One of our very important campaign is SIV program, special visa program for the Afghanis and Iraqi. Pretty much we call them war heroes, people who help us overseas with the linguistics and culture advisors. So we want to bring those people back home here because their life in danger. And then the other thing that we do is to support the refugees. As today, the administration actually, I think they are, the number of refugees they want resettled this year about 45,000, but so far we had only 10,500. So it's really short. So we work on adding that number. And the other thing we work on anti-Muslim bigot. And those are 3 main campaigns that we're working for right now. And thank you.
So it took me a while to get to a job that I really wanted to have. I think that, you know, when I think back kind of to what led me to Refugee Services, I was an immigrant, I wasn't a refugee, and we left Moscow when I was 11, and we moved to Portugal with my mom. And I think going through the experience of you know, being in an unfamiliar country, and of course we did not leave for, you know, religious or political persecution. We left because we thought that, you know, the life would be better elsewhere. But going through the experience of, you know, not knowing the language, going to school without, you know, knowing anybody, not kind of losing your network of connections and friends, you know, loss of social status. There are a lot of things that I think I can relate. And so when I started my internship, I interned at Refugee Services of Texas, which is another resettlement agency here in Houston. I kind of knew right away that that's what I wanted to do for for the rest of my life. And it's a very interesting profession. It's not by any means easy, and especially having come from kind of doing direct casework and spending a lot of time with clients, you learn a lot of really heartbreaking stories, but you also see a lot of good and a lot of hard work that people are willing to put into their new lives here. So it's very inspirational as well. And yeah, that's what I intend to do for as long as I possibly can.
Thank you so much from all of you. Our next question is, what are some barriers that newly resettled refugees face during and after resettlement? And maybe you could talk about your personal experiences or also things that you've come across in your work.
Well, I think I'll just mention that in order to kind of understand resettlement and the way it operates in the U.S., you have to realize that it's a very short program funded by the federal government, but it's extremely short. So there are the 3 months that we call reception and placement. So this is when kind of intensive case management happens when refugees arrive. In the United States, there are 9 big national organizations. We call them voluntary agencies. Majority of them are religiously affiliated, and so at Interfaith we work with Episcopal Migration Ministries. So basically all that means is that they send the cases to us, and we look at the case, and we make sure that we have the staffing capacity, language capacity to resettle this particular family. And then from that point on, we don't really know when they'll arrive, but we know that they're in the system, being processed. So after the 3-month period, there is a continuation of the program where refugees receive very small financial assistance. So it's either 6-month or 8-month program, which includes the 3 months. So if you can imagine, just moving to a completely different country, not knowing the language, and after 8 months you were supposed to be self-sufficient, and of course that's very difficult. And thankfully refugees are very determined. They work really, really hard. But I think what really helps in the process is the community. I think none of our nonprofit organizations in the city could operate without volunteers and without having somebody that can do things like take you to a grocery store or invite you to have dinner with your family. And I think that that's really what makes a difference. Is it's not when somebody does something for refugees, but it's when people make you feel normal. It's actually a phrase that my boss uses a lot, so I'll steal it from him. But it's normal people in abnormal circumstances. So I think that that's it's really important to keep that in the back of your mind, that it's if you get a chance to volunteer with refugees, that's all that they really want. They want to be accepted, and they just want a normal life here like we all do.
Oh man, you just took me back about maybe 11, 12 years. So when I got here back in 2006, I think it was Monday, 27 November, I think, and it was a rainy day, and I remember, I think around 8 o'clock, and we landed, and it's supposed to be, usually they have orientation before you arrive here, right? You get orientation in the country that you're coming from. In my case, Egypt. So the orientation start from Egypt. They will tell you where you're gonna go, where you're gonna have first day. They will tell you everything. But the other thing is the information is outdated. So as soon as you land, everything that you're being told is totally unrelated. It's irrelevant. And what happened to me and my 2 young brothers, we waited about I think 6 hours for the organization to come and pick us from the airport. So until the TSA guy, he's like, you know what? I'm probably gonna send you guys to a hotel because nobody can come and get you guys. And I don't know where was the mistake. I don't know there's not really coordination. But that's my first experience what happened to me. So for me and my brothers, from that experience, we learned a lot, and not to trust everything that people tell you, especially the resettlement agencies. And this is the narrative between every refugee with the sponsor or the respected agency. They having that kind of like, I don't trust the organization because they not do me the real services. So that's the issue we have. But having my case manager, he's a really good guy, and he doesn't speak Arabic, and we were speaking Arabic. Now we had this issue, the language issue, and he tried to break us down to understand him. They had no volunteers at that time. So what we used to do, we have to leave our home to get in the bus. Sometimes we have to walk about 2 miles to go to office and tell us, hey, you need to sign this paper, you need to have this, you need to have that. But the only thing that he wanted us to do is to get to work. And I knew he was pushed by his boss. Those, especially me and my young brother, I think at that time he was 19. No, I think 21. You guys need to start working. You guys need to be independent people. And we had that in our mind already because my parents in Africa at that time, they're suffering. So we need to get to work too, But is it $7.25 would be enough for us? And that was I think that was a big question for me and my brother, because they took us to a company, work for 8 hours, you get paid minimum wages. I mean, I can't even. I remember after 3 months they stopped all the assistance. They stopped the refugee cash system, which was $200. They stopped the Medicaid, the food stamp. So we had only left with Medicaid. But I never seen a doctor actually, because I think I was just okay. Never seen a doctor from the first time. So we never used anything. And we struggled for the rest of 3 months, but we were able to get back in our truck. And for our case, maybe we were lucky, or maybe we worked extra. But when I worked again with nonprofit organizations, especially YMCA, and I have seen new arrival, they're really struggling because not everybody, maybe have that luck or have that tendency to do what I did or my brother did. So it's very difficult for the others to do exactly what we did. So overall experience, it was very difficult, but it's rewarding, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
Thank you. Do you have a response?
Yeah, I think that on one hand, the experience of any refugee that's coming to Houston, Texas in particular, is normal. It's very normal in the sense that it's just as normal as an experience would be to any community of color, to any single mother, to any Muslim, to anybody struggling in Houston to make it. And it's important to remember that we live in Texas that doesn't believe in public assistance, that believes that if you're poor, it's your fault, and that nobody's going to give you a handout, nobody's going to give you anything for free, and you better struggle, and you better hurt, and you better prove to the world that you deserve to be here. And so a lot of what you experienced in those first 6 hours, you understood what that normal really was. What's normal is nobody is here to help you, to some degree, right? What's unusual, I think, is the degree to which our communities really learn to rely on one another. The vast majority of the staff at all of the resettlement agencies are themselves refugees who had just previously gone through that same experience maybe months before, years before, remembering what it was like to be told, hey, I'm not actually here to help you, I'm just here to make sure that you go work in a factory for $7.25. And as long as you do that, we'll give you a couple $100 and we'll make sure that your rent gets paid for. But nobody is here to help you, right? and at the same time, he's an incredibly kind human being who may invite you over to dinner, who may share with you, you know, friends from the community, and that's the role that we have to play for one another. And so our communities in some ways are really abnormal in that we have that history of being together, on relying on one another, on the kids playing together outside, and really having a community. And so a lot of our communities are incredibly strong, going through what so many others across the city go through, and across the state, and of course across the country. And I think it is important to put that in context of a history. You know, when the refugee resettlement process first was born, it was to say, hey, there are immigrants that we as a country have a ideal and a value to uphold, to welcome them here and to give them a real chance, right, at a life. Not life in a refugee camp, not life, you know, running from someone behind you, but life in America and the American dream. And in 1980, that meant for 3 years you were eligible for assistance. You were given English language classes, you were given job training, you were given a lot of services that amounted to an investment in the future productive capacities of our community members. And over time, that investment was degraded into these people are too lazy, we better make sure they work, right? And so that's a flip that truthfully already began in the 80s. That's a battle that our country has fought for 4 or 5 decades. When it comes to the refugees don't come here able to vote. It may take them at least 1 or 2 voter cycles to become citizens. And after that, the demographics show that those communities don't vote. They don't have the economic power right off the bat. They're not valuable to the political institutions. So the political institutions made it very clear what they thought that balance should be for refugees very early on. And so refugees, since the start, have been slowly demonized and slowly turned into a community where, oh, we're going to show you, you know, we're going to show you that you don't need welfare if you just force somebody to work. You know, if we force somebody in a factory, if we give away or cut off all their assistance, if we put them into a do or die, sink or swim scenario, then who needs welfare? And so another American ideal kind of evaporates, which is welcoming an immigrant, welcoming a stranger. And so, but again, I think in some ways that's incredibly normal for the standards that we set for ourselves in this country.
Well, I guess you know, just coming from kind of the you know, perspective of actually having worked for an agency, you know, by no means resettlement is, you know, an easy process, and what I would say is employment is incredibly hard. You know, when our staff, you know, job developers, when they approach employers, employers want work history, employers want reference, employers ask for, you know, certification or education. And so the first jobs, I would say the first several jobs that a refugee will have, that will be very basic, a lot of times at a little over minimum wage. But what that does is that creates a work history. So we work with our clients to make sure that they understand that part of it, that, you know, even if you arrive here and you are a doctor, you will not be able to right away transition into that profession or even start at an entry level. This is the process that will take years. And in the meantime, you have to support your family. Because a lot of the you know, refugee cases that we see, it may be family of 5 or 7. So it does put a lot of pressure on the adults and sometimes on younger people as well, to maybe not pursue their education or not pursue their education right away because they're helping to support, you know, their family. And that's the reality of it. I do want to say that, you know, agencies, where they see gaps in services, because, you know, every social sphere that you take, you know, none of the nonprofits would say, oh yeah, we're fine, we are good on money, we don't need more help, volunteers. You know, you're always pressed for time, you always wish you had more funds. So it's what do you do about that, right? So I mentioned volunteers. You know, we, for instance, we realized that in particular with female refugees from Arabic-speaking countries, they were becoming very isolated because of the a lot of times of the culture of maybe the husband being the one working, staying home with the kids, not being able to transportation in Houston, unfortunately, is an issue. So, what can an agency do about something like that? And it started as a volunteer project and, something that we worked on for a couple of years. And each agency tries to do something like that, where they see need, and sometimes they're not able to invest money right away. They may start writing grants, and this is a process that may take, a couple of years, several years to get to. But how do you fix that? I know with our staff, we look at vocational training. We're lucky to have funding to have a person on staff that looks at career opportunities. And for instance, one of the most recent ones where our refugee clients are able to enroll in a nursing certification program, and it's something that takes months to do, but it creates a career path and a connection to a hospital where they do an internship. And of course, this is a very small number of clients. It doesn't fit everybody. And kind of, we talked about this a little bit before, that there's no one solution that fits every refugee that comes in, because their education level is different, their ability to just kind of up and function in a new place is very different. But I think it's worth investing in and worth taking action, because if you kind of just see this as a something that you watch in the news, refugees arriving in boats, and then when you see the way the process happens in the United States, and if you get connected to a refugee, and it just becomes a lot less trivial, and you realize, okay, there's something that I can do about this. What if I mentor a refugee? What if I'm that person that after a refugee is picked up from the airport, that I make sure that I go and visit them once or twice a week. So it kind of always brings it back to, at least for me, what else can we do, and how do we get you guys involved? Because after this, we expect all of you to volunteer with us. No, but not with us, but you know what I mean. Just if you, there is a lot of power in educating the community and telling you about the security screening process, and how this operates, so that you can go back and tell your friends about this, that nobody shows up on our doorstep. It's a process that takes years. We have some of our caseworkers that grew up in a refugee camp. They did not know life outside of it. And I apologize, I keep losing my voice today from talking so much. Perhaps I should let somebody else talk.
Actually, that was great that you brought that up. It was something we were going to ask at the end, but how can students get involved in the refugee community here in Houston, and also in different organizations that offer refugee services?
Well, I'm a strong believer, it doesn't necessarily have to be with the resettlement agencies, because there's so many, either smaller nonprofits or programs. Of course, there are the 5 resettlement agencies, which is Catholic Charities, YMCA, Interfaith Ministries, Alliance, and Refugee Services of Texas. So, sometimes if you already have a connection to one of them for a particular program, ask about their resettlement program. I really like working with PAIR, which is a partnership for the, oh yeah, you guys know all about them, a partnership for the advancement and immersion of refugees. And to me, it's something really important that I wish that they could be in every single school in Houston, because they have after-school activities for refugee youth. And if you think about, youth is not very easy period of your life, especially if you just arrived and you don't speak the language, and you don't have a lot of financial means. So having somebody close to your age that you can look up to, that mentors you, or invites you to do things that normal teenagers would do, that's absolutely priceless. But then they do a lot more than that, leadership trainings and such. So I think a lot of it just kind of depends how much time you have and what is it that you enjoy doing. I think for me, one of the programs that I'm hopefully will do in the future has to do with youth, because I see that on a daily basis is, that tricky age of, yes, I have to help my family, but, I also want a really good future for myself. How do I go about this? What school do I enroll into? Where are these GD certifications? But I think just having the example of somebody who's going to school, like yourselves, that's really powerful, because a lot of times, parents don't understand the grading system right away, or they may not be able to help with homework. But if you have somebody who is constantly checking on you and kind of holding you accountable and saying yes, you can do this, it'll make a huge difference in their lives. So however you go about this, and I left my business card, so if you need a connection to any other agency, feel free to reach out.
Yep, agree 100%. If you allow me, just let me to add a little bit. So I wish if I got a mentor. I'm 37 years old. When I got here, I was 26. Probably I didn't too old for mentor. But if I had somebody to tell me what step that you need to take, I don't know if my life would be changed right now or not, but it would be very, very helpful. Because having somebody tell you like, hey, this is America, this is Houston, Texas, what do you want to do? This is the resources that you have. If you want to do this, go through this way. If you want to do this, go through this way. Now, I would say there's two ways that you can get involved. One, if you join, as you said, work directly with refugees, mentorship, helping, anything that you can do directly with refugees through their resettlement organization. The other thing is advocacy, which I love. Now, I would just tell you a little story, two stories if I have the time. One story back in September of 2015, and I was in North Iraq, and a U.S. Army officer walked to me and talked to me. It's like, hey, Adam, where are you from? So I'm U.S. or my background? And he said, your background. And I told him from Sudan, Darfur. He's like, really? How you get to U.S.? And I told him the stories about the refugees, how I came as a refugee to U.S. And he's like, sit down and tell me a little bit about refugee program. Because at that time the debate it was so intense. And I told him from A to Z. And I told him, in fact, the government, how much the government pay for the refugees, and what service that government provide to the refugees. And he said, well, I really had a different idea about refugees, but if that's the case, I'm okay with my money to go to refugees program. He's totally changed. So having that conversation with somebody who does not believe in refugee or immigration in general is really important. The other thing is through advocacy to the government, senators. In April last year, we our organization, Veterans for American Idea, we went to Washington D.C. About 25 veterans, and for 5 days we had advocacy. We met every senator that involved in immigration. We met with Cruz, Carnier, Sheila Jackson Lee, with Al Green from Texas, especially from Houston, the other two. So we met all of them. And we asked them to add 2,500 new visas for the Afghans SIVs, because the President Trump, he wanted to stop the program. And we say no, because this program is very vital. It will harm our national security. And we had this for 5 days. And we left on Friday. Before we get home, on Saturday, the Congress passed 4,000 new visas for the SIVs. That was powerful. And that's the advocacy. And I think a lot of you guys have a passion in advocacy, and you guys can get involved. talk to them, educate them. I know you will change somebody's heart. You don't have to change everybody's heart. You can change some.
Just to add to that, the speaker that couldn't be here today, Ghislaine Williams, if you just go to, just Google it, Refugee Council USA, they have a, very small office here in Houston, but she will send you updates. So, if you get on her mailing list, if there are any meetings with, any legislators, local representatives, or anything being passed that needs attention when it comes to refugee resettlement. It's a really good tool, and she kind of keeps everybody informed, and every month we get this report that says failed that comes from Refugee Council USA, because the number of refugee arrivals is so very low at this point. And like you had mentioned that the ceiling was set at 45,000 plus 15,000 special immigrant visa holders, which are who worked with U.S. military abroad from Afghanistan and Iraq. But there's no way we'll get to this number at this pace. I was just looking at our numbers yesterday from this time. Over 1 year ago, we had several hundred clients that were resettled, from October 1st up until now. And we've had 90, which is a very, very low number for us. And it's a real shame because, Houston has so much to give. We have this welcoming city, very diverse city. All these, already pockets historically that have refugees from around the world. And I wish that we could do more and resettle a lot more people than we are currently.
That's actually an incredible story. I mean, that you guys were really able to transform the lives of people. I think also I've seen these ridiculous shirts. Have you seen the shirts that have like troops over refugees? They try to paint this either or scenario of either you have enough money to support the troops, or I've seen those, and they're like one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen.
Right.
And I think people who aren't stupid, but they wear them, and they think that there's actually some sort of debate going on about where is our money really going to be well spent, our troops or our refugees. But to actually hear about an American veteran and a group of American veterans going and doing that blows my mind. It's really incredible. And so many of our SIVs that come are already U.S. veterans, in a way. They maybe were contracted out by someone else, but they were on the same tanks, walking into the same rooms, holding the same guns as everyone else. That's incredible. The chairman of my board of directors was actually a mentor assigned to my family when we first came here in the early 90s. And he's done so many things for me to transform my life and enable me to do everything that I've dreamed of. For me, and I'm not even talking about my parents, who he told where to send their kids to school, which grocery stores to go to, customs. It's actually incredible for me to think about how much that mentorship relationship accomplished for us. And it's very sad when I think about how many families come in now without that. And when you really think about the fact that so many of the needs that our communities have been identified and solved for those who have the ability to navigate political infrastructure and make it happen for themselves and for their community. And I mean, you're talking about how did I survive off 725? Was I lucky? Was I special? I mean, of course you're a special human being. And of course you know that you have friends and neighbors who that didn't work for, and who struggled and didn't make it, and maybe moved out of state, or heaven forbid ended up homeless. But we know that that happens. We know that there are cases for whom our assistance, we can't possibly do enough. And at the same time, we know that we have examples where we were able to take care of ourselves. We know how much mentorship can do. We know what a expanded vocational training investment can yield. And yet, it's not there for communities that are coming in. And I think it's really important we think about who those communities are, and the degree to which they actually have an ability to influence some sort of political conversation where they're being written underneath a line of troops. They're completely disempowered to navigate those spaces. And so, but the question we're asking is, what can we do? And so I actually, in addition to mentorship, one-on-one connections with refugees, I think that it is really critical that we start to draw lines between those communities that aren't represented and between those communities that the political interests simply don't care about, because they're not just refugees. And you know, that saying, first they came from the communists and I did not speak up. Well, they've been coming for the refugees for 40 years now. That's a community that hasn't had a voice and that has slowly been taken advantage of, and their support has been cut steadily for 40 years. But all of us have communities that we come from that don't have a voice. And so I think it's really important, and that's another reason why hearing that American troops, which is a totally different community, that in some ways has completely different challenges, but also similar of emotional and economic and social adaptation, right? The degree to which our many different communities are actually to recognize that similar position and claiming our own narrative and conceiving of different ways to get what we need, different ways to empower ourselves, than relying on some political establishment to do it for us. That's I think incredible, and I think that all of us have communities that we're a part of that can hear that and can recognize that it's important that you go and be a part of that. So I think it's not just about refugees.
Thank you. Our next question is actually kind of related to that. Does your organization typically face opposition from anti-refugee activists, and how has this opposition been escalated since the Trump administration? And we actually have a quick video. It's a video compilation to help familiarize the audience with some of the rhetoric that's been surrounding refugee issues, in case they haven't really heard of this. And yeah, sorry, it will be behind you, if you don't mind turning around. Tested it at the beginning and it worked fine, but of course this is happening. Do you want to refresh it? Sorry about this.
This continent is at a boiling point. While the debate over Muslim refugees rages in America, we're traveling across Europe, where the far right is turning angry rhetoric
The reality is the next terrorist attack in Europe will be by Muslims
into reality.
We want Sweden to stay Swedish.
Fueled by a seemingly endless river of refugees, as well as by the ISIS attacks in Paris.
At least one attack posing as a refugee.
Ultra-conservative, anti-immigrant parties are on the rise.
The worst thing that could happen to the left has happened in Germany. Hundreds of young male refugees from the Middle East and North Africa under suspicion for molesting hundreds of women. The Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, under enormous pressure as well. You remember Ms. Merkel was, of course, behind Germany accepting more than 1 million refugees. And many on the American left would like to do the same thing here. In fact, there is a new campaign underway right now to rebrand illegal immigrants as economic refugees. According to polls, most Americans don't want amnesty for illegal aliens, but accepting refugees sounds a lot better, doesn't it?
Establishing new vetting measures to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America. We don't want them here.
The Post reports that according to two people briefed in the meeting, the president asked, quote, "Why are we having all these people from shithole countries come here?" referring to African countries and Haiti. The president then went on to talk about how they needed to bring in more people from places like Norway.
Now I hear we want to take in 200,000 Syrians, right? And they could be, listen, they could be ISIS. I don't know.
President Trump speaking about his controversial executive order, one that bars 134 million people from 7 Muslim majority countries from coming to the United States.
Not a Muslim family. We're totally prepared to work it out very nicely. You see it at the airport, you of this country for many years.
Muslims here in Northeast Wisconsin tell me they're concerned about what this could mean for their future. For 40 years, Mohammed Rashid has called Northeast Wisconsin and America home. But now he says he's worried.
These executive orders are putting our life really in danger.
That order banning citizens from 7 Muslim-majority countries from entering the U.S. for 90 days.
It does concern me.
It also bans Syrian refugees.
The history of America has been always to open the door. People, those who are desperate and destitute. Now, with this executive order, is shutting the door to people, those who are extremely vulnerable.
We are a country that has a refugee program, and what Donald Trump did in the last 24 hours is disgusting, disgraceful, completely un-American, and I'm here in protest. How dare he act alone and sign this document to not let these people in our country.
So something that the Rice community, I guess, deals with is being in a bubble. And so we wanted to make sure that we did address some of the more negative stigmas that are coming across from lots of people in our nation and all over the world. So if you want me to repeat the question, I can do that, or you can go ahead.
Well, I think sometimes I think that we're also in a bit of a bubble because you know, refugee resettlement in the U.S. Had historically had bipartisan support. You know, sometimes there were less refugees, more refugees, but nothing, you know, nearly as what has happened over the last year. I think that, you know, because we are an agency that has a variety of programs, we don't just do refugee resettlement. We haven't been, I guess, as vocal, and we haven't done as much advocacy as we have over the last year. And I think that that's really, you know, it's an important change because we want to educate people, and we want to give them tools that they can use to support resettlement. I mean, it was a very sad period of time when the travel ban went into effect. But kind of being a positive person, you know, deep in heart. I also thought that what it brought out, I mean, it made me really proud to see people at the airport, which, you know, it happened here in Houston as well. ACLU, you know, all these organizations that were sending their lawyers, you know, doing all this pro bono work. So kind of seeing the positive side of it is, you know, people became a lot more politically engaged this year. Not just in refugee resettlement, but, you know, in the country in general. But, you know, when you see the scale of this crisis, you know, UNHCR, United Nations High Commission for Refugees, every year they release this report, and every year this number goes up. So, you know, now there are well over 22.5 million refugees all over the world, you know, over 60 million displaced people. And I think that for us, you know, if we're here and we live in this, you know, superpower of a country, how can our response be so terrible? And how can numbers, you know, go down when these people need us the most? But, you know, I also believe in new opportunities and finding ways to work with people. And, you know, there's a lot to be said about advocacy. And I think that, you know, for a while maybe we took our lifestyle and kind of the progress of this country for granted, up until we lose that, and then, you know, people realize, oh, my voice does actually matter, and, you know, why didn't I vote in the election? So, you know, my kind of words of wisdom would be to get, you know, whatever issue your passion is, but to realize that, you know, you do have the power, and these, you know, meetings that, you know, Refugee Council USA organizes. You wouldn't believe how many legislators, how many politicians are completely ignorant about the process. You know, they have no idea about how many steps are involved in the vetting process. You know, multiple security checks with Department of State, Federal Homeland Security, and medical checks. I mean, this is the strictest way to come into this country as a refugee. And, you know, I mentioned that, you know, this period of time, it can take anywhere from 18 to 36 months, but a lot of times it takes years for somebody to get here. And now this process is becoming more and more difficult. So, you know, get out there and call your senators, call your representatives, and find a way to get involved, because every single thing that you do does actually matter.
So, oh man, that video just raised my blood pressure a little bit. so when I was a refugee in Egypt, and going through the process, I should say it, medical clearance and security or vetting, and I didn't know until recently when people start talking about the vetting process that I waited for 36 months to be vetted. 3 years being vetted. Because I was a refugee since 2001, and I met with the DHS officer, I think back in 2003, and I flew here in end of 2006. That was 36 months vetting process. Now I'm sure like a lot of refugees going through this a lot, maybe about 80%. So there's two things I think. Either America's getting brown or America's getting broke financially. Because I believe military America is the strongest, and nobody can actually defeat America whatsoever. Economically, I think we're doing good. The only option is left that America is getting brown today, and some people are scared from this. And then that's why they use the rhetoric, Islamic or Muslims, or since 1975, what is the statistic? How many refugees committed act of terrorism since 1975? One? One. And recently, if you guys read, when the administration wanted to know how much it costs for a refugee program, and they released only 3 pages for the cost. And there's a source, people say, there's a leak. The refugees' contribution is overweighted the refugee cost. And the administration did not release that, only 3 pages.
It's actually a study that Trump's administration commissioned, and it's, you know, they showed that it's a 63 billion influx into the economy by refugees and immigrants. And then they just decided to do away with it because it wasn't convenient to release that.
Exactly, because this again is their narrative. And I will tell you from my experience. I have a Sudanese community in Natchitoches, Sudanese community in Amarillo, Sudanese community in some Orange, Texas. Some communities is small city that you would never even heard about. And then they work in meat companies, manufacturing. They're working so hard. They're contributing a lot. So I personally received a death threat because Human Rights First, they asked me to do video and talk about my experience being refugees and being in an army. And I received 2 death threats because I'm a Muslim. Because what I said in the video, I said, my name is Adam, I'm a former refugee and I'm Muslim. Right? And some people say, like, you know, we can accept that you're black, but why would you mention that you're Muslim? Literally. Now that's my identity. I mean, there's no way I can hide from that. I'm a black, I'm a former refugee, I'm a Muslim, I'm all proud of it. I'm American, I'm from Texas. I'm proud of it. You know, that's my personality today. I cannot change it. So our state today, I think we have to be strong. We have to focus. We shouldn't let people distract us from what we want to accomplish. And what we want to accomplish, to keep this noise away. America is beautiful when we all together. And I like the diversity. It's so beautiful. That's what I can say.
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. I have not, in my life, in the work that we do, experienced anybody keeping me from doing any of my work. In fact, we have been certain the entire time that there's an infinite number of Houstonians who are interested in supporting the needs of refugees, and there's a large group that needs it, and the only challenge is figuring out how do we put those people together, because there's more than enough people who believe in those values and believe in those ideals, and most of us should just turn off the TV and stop paying attention to a bunch of corporate media nonsense, which is making money off of our fears and our high blood pressure. And if we can do that, then there's more than enough work to do, and nobody can really stop us. But I do think that it is important that we look honestly at our own selves and our own histories as a country. This is not the first group of immigrants that have been demonized. It's not the first group of blacks. It's not the first group of Muslims. And I'm reminded whenever I hear this bipartisan issue, we made our first film. We started in 2014, 2015, and we made a film that showed parallels in the lives between refugees from Iraq and Burma and Congo with undocumented from Mexico and Africa. And a lot of our friends at the agencies with whom we've had very close ties since the beginning said, guys, you cannot do that. You cannot let people think that refugees have anything to do with undocumented, because we have bipartisan support for a program that has always had bipartisan support, and if you rock the boat, then people are gonna start talking. And this was in 2014, and it wasn't until the next year that all this nonsense started coming out of Syrian refugee terrorists and all that. And of course we made the film anyway and everybody loved it, but it always reminds me that, listen, bipartisan support was not enough before, during, and hopefully after. And the arrival of Trump is not a new wave in the country. Mm-hmm. Our ignorance to those issues maybe makes it feel like it was, but in the year 2000, refugees were still not getting the support that they needed to get. And the standard that we had for our newest neighbors was not the standard that we would really give to our family and to our friends. And so I think that we can't let ourselves be deceived by these political tides. Yeah, there was bipartisan support for refugee resettlement since 1980. Mm-hmm. And bipartisan support went down, 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 down. And as soon as we start having to defend ourselves as economic agents, and we say, oh no, look, here's how much money you spent on me, and here are my tax returns. As soon as we get into that conversation, we've already lost. And sometimes that's what it takes to enter the bipartisan realm, where you have a conversation based on what bipartisan politics is supposed to be about, which is about nonsense. It's about nothing. It's about dehumanizing us. It's about segregating us. It's about it's either one side of the country or another. It's never being honest about reality, that we've been brown. I mean, right. We've been brown this entire time. I mean, the notion, what else is there if not brown? I mean, we're all communities of color. Right. It's the erasure of color through a facade of whiteness that that is unfortunately not a new concept. It's one that we've been fighting with the whole time, and I think that that's really important that we recognize that. So at least we know what we're fighting with and for and against.
Just to add a little quick about the question itself. So back in 2009, and after the shooting in what was that, Fort Hood? You guys remember that? You guys were too young for that. So after the Fort Hood shooting, we were in a training camp, and a soldier. And then we start to introducing ourselves. And one of our buddies was Iraqi. He was from Iraq. And he stood up and he introduced himself. My name is Mansour, and I'm from Iraq. And once he said he's from Iraq, a female soldier, she jumped and she's like, oh, we have a terrorist among us? We have him in a U.S. uniform. Like, U.S. flag, U.S. Army, name, and then the whole just went quiet. Nobody can say nothing. And one thing in Army, I never faced any kind of racism in Army, but in fact, so a drill sergeant, he stood up, and I was like, oh man, and he's like, oh Lord Jesus Christ. He was like, come here outside. So we had a formation outside, and it was about 1 o'clock, just after lunch. People were asleep at that time, usually getting sleep around that time, get tired, you know. So we were in formation for 3 hours, and he was giving us a lecture. What it means to be a soldier, what it means to be a U.S. Army, what it means to be a U.S. citizen. And he explained to us from like a kid can understand what is different between terrorists and religion. Why you cannot say a Muslim are terrorists, and you can, who we fighting for in Iraq and who we fighting in Afghanistan. And he left, and we left, and then again around at 6 p.m. we had another 3 hours lecture, right? For the whole week, trying to distinguish who we're fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, who is a terrorist that we define by the law, and who is soldier that Muslim or Christian or a Jew or whatever religion he may have. But the soldier who said that, he never get punished. But he was humiliated in front of us, right? And because he just did not know, like Muslim are terrorists, you know. So in Army, that's what or the military in general, they use a teaching tool and at the same time our law. So we got rules and we got teaching tools. You go hand by hand. So I think if we can, you know, do that in our country, that would be really good, because we cannot leave just people accusing people by being terrorists or being criminal without just prejudices. That's really dangerous.
Thank you so much to all our panelists for being here and sharing their stories and their opinions too. Does anyone else have a question? We have a little bit of time for probably just one or two. Anyone?
I have a question about housing. So you talked about when refugees come, they have a bit of assistance. They might get a couple $100s to help pay for rent. I was wondering how exactly they were placed. I would assume families were like placed together, but what about refugees that came by themselves? Were there like certain areas or certain places you led them to live, or were they just kind of on their own to find a place to live and were given some money? Sure,
that's a great question. It's actually the responsibility of the agencies to find them housing, initial housing. So we have to have an apartment ready for them to move in, and it has to meet certain criteria. So, you know, like have enough bedrooms for everybody, has to have, you know, spoons, forks. I mean, there's like a very detailed list of it. Majority of the clients, and this is for, you know, all 5 resettlement agencies, they're placed in the southwest area of Houston. It's a very, you know, diverse area already. Agencies try to find, so, you know, that reception and placement period of 3 months that I mentioned initially, depending on how many people there in the family, there's money there to help furnish that apartment and pay rent, and then up until the 8-month period, again, like based on the number of people in the family, that's when the small assistance happens. But the Southwest, I mean, you know, historically we have an international community there. Agencies also have to look into public transportation. So, you know, like sometimes communities in the Woodlands or Cypress will ask us, why not here? We don't want them to be isolated from the community completely. And, you know, it will take them a while to get a car of their own. And, you know, sometimes when we map from like the place of employment to where the clients live, it's horrible. You know, it can take 3 buses to to get to like a 5 mile, to drive that 5 mile distance. So historically, that's where it's been happening. We also try to, like you mentioned, single clients. If somebody's coming on their own, we try to work with faith partners, different congregations, because we realize that those that are coming on their own or the particularly vulnerable, we sometimes see single mothers with kids, that we get them extra support. And a lot of times churches will help financially until that particular family, gets stable. We've also worked with other resettlement agencies and said, okay, we have a client that's coming from Burma, they're coming on their own. It's going to be really expensive for them to afford rent. Can we see if there's another single client from Burma or potentially, small family to where it would be culturally appropriate for them to be in the same place, and if they're willing to do that. So there's quite a bit of kind of research that's done, but we have to make sure that it's also a place that they will be able to afford once that assistance is over. So it's not going to be the nice apartment of Kirby, but initially we sign a lease for 6 months, so that if after that period of time, if the family wants to move elsewhere, they have the possibility to. But realistically, with the jobs that we mentioned, it may take them longer to move away from those apartments. Sorry, it's like a very long way to answer a simple question.
Why do you ask about housing?
I was just curious.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time to come out here, and also to the audience for spending their time here as well. And Elena did bring some materials. If anyone is curious and wants to follow up, she has her cards and some handouts down here as well. Thank you.
Grab the security screening information pamphlet with you.
And can I get one last round of applause for the awesome team that put this event together?